Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Murder in the Yoga Store is the true story of the brutal killing of a beautiful young woman at a chic Lululemon yoga wear shop. The grisly murder was committed on a pleasant Friday night in upscale Bethesda, Maryland, a leafy suburb of Washington, D.C. In this riveting narrative by veteran journalist Peter Ross Range, the author for the first time brings together the tale of what really happened in the yoga store murder. He portrays the personalities of both a victim and a murderer, along with the strange and convoluted circumstances of the crime and its cover-up. Range meticulously exposes layer upon layer of deceit and confusion. His account builds the tension of the police investigation until the real story, so odd and creepy, takes your breath away. The drama of the murder trial is a moving emotional roller coaster built around the prosecutors, the detectives, and the family of the victim. The book that we're featuring this evening is Murder in the Yoga Store, with journalist and author Peter Ross Range. Welcome to the program, and thank you for agreeing to this interview, Peter Ross Range.
Hi, Dan.
Good evening. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on this program, and congratulations on this book, Murder in the Yoga Store. Thank you very much. Now, let's get to this fine book, and we have to really set the stage here because this is it's a very gripping story, and you provided all of the details completely. So let's go back to who Jayna Murray is, and let's try to weave in sort of her life working at Lululemon and Bethesda, Maryland, what that really is like, and the neighborhood where Lululemon is and where she lives and her friends live. And but take us back to her early life. Her parents, Phyllis and David, I believe. And
yes.
Take us back to her early childhood. Tell us really, paint the portrait of really who she really was, Jayna Murray really was.
Yeah, she was a vivacious and beautiful young woman, 30 years old when she died, born in the Midwest, grew up partly in Australia, partly in Houston, Texas, partly in Phoenix, Arizona, and was a very athletic and fit person. She was, I think, 7 years younger than her oldest brother, so she copied her brothers in everything. They were both very athletic. One brother became a triathlete. Jayna loved running from an early age. At age 11, she rode 150 miles on her bicycle because her brothers were riding 150 miles in a charity ride. She was noticed by coaches and by dance teachers, was recruited to throw discus and shot put on a team and set high school records. But dance was her big activity. A dance teacher and the owner of a big dance program in Houston spotted her, and she wasn't good for ballet because she was so athletic and muscular. She wasn't skinny and trim like a ballet dancer, so she trained in tap dancing and was so good at tap that Savion Glover, probably the world's leading tap dancer at the time, recruited her to dance with him a few times when he was in Texas. Jayna seemed to be headed for a career in dance, but gave it up after she heard how hard it could be in career terms and how early and how young people tended to burn out. and instead went to college to study business. Did her first semester at the University of St. Louis campus in Madrid. I could go on a little more about that if you want.
Well, sure. Just continue with the type of personality. She was a very engaging person. So tell us about the kind of personality she was.
I mean, it was apparent. Even I talked to some of the people she went to school with in Madrid, and she was always the life of the party, always a kind of a group leader, always picking people up, making people feel good. She made a difference. She was a different person. People remembered her more strongly, they said, than most folks they had been with. After that first year in Madrid, she did an around-the-world semester at sea on a ship. The students who were on that ship with her talked to me and said the same sort of thing about her. She was a go-getter. She would do anything, took risks, was a daring person, was still dancing at that time, and eventually ended up at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where she studied international communications and business and got her degree. She went off to Texas and worked for 6 years at Halliburton, the oil field services company down there. Had a promising career. Some folks said, if you stick around here, you'll be our boss someday. Once again was considered both a leader and the life of many parties, a spark in relationships, but she decided she wanted more. She came back to came back to Washington and attended Johns Hopkins University to get not one but two master's degrees, one in communications, one in business administration. And it was during that time that she discovered Lululemon as a business. She discovered it through a best friend and housemate or apartment mate who had a Lululemon shopping bag one day with all of those sayings and uplifting slogans on it. That got her interested in the company. She started studying it for a business administration course, and then she was encouraged to get a job there, which she did. And she apparently loved the work and was even hoping to move into Lululemon management in Vancouver when she graduated 3 months. She was murdered 3 months before she was supposed to graduate.
Well, tell us about Lululemon, because not everybody in America, and certainly for our world audience, tell us about Lululemon, what kind of business it is, and also tell us in Bethesda here what it's surrounded by, because it's very interesting, the neighborhood here. I mean, so tell us about that, please.
Well, Lululemon is a what they call a yoga-inspired apparel company with clothing mainly for women, which was started in about 1999 by a man named Chip Wilson in Vancouver in one little storefront, beachfront shop. It grew in about 11 years to become a billion-dollar company with more than 200 shops worldwide. It's upscale, very good product, but pretty high prices, appeals to an upscale customer base. And that's why there was a shop located in Bethesda, Maryland, which is a very upscale and Tony suburb of Washington, D.C. It was surrounded by, dress shops where you could pay $1,500 for a dress, or across the street was a salon and spa where a woman could get a facial for $175, and so forth. It was not overly posh, but definitely appealing to an upscale audience in Washington.
Right, and then the Apple Store is right next door, and we won't jump ahead, but that's be important.
That is true. Yes.
Yeah. Now, what was her relationship like with her parents?
It was great. I mean, they were a very unusual family. I've rarely met a family that was this close. She talked to her mother every single day. Her mother was still in Texas. She once made a 600-mile round trip to visit her brother for half an hour when he was about to be deployed to Iraq. When her parents would come to Washington for a visit, even they would take a hotel, a couple of hotel rooms or a suite not far from Jena, from her apartment, but she wouldn't even go home at night. She would stay over in the hotel room, even if she had to sleep on the floor. That's how close the family was.
Right. Yeah. And so, how old is she in 2011? We'll just start for 2011. How old is she at that time?
30 years old.
And 30 years old. And what is she? What's her role at the store again? And what's her situation in her life in terms of romance and?
Okay. Well, she was a salesperson at the store. I mean, everybody at the store is a salesperson, but she was just about half a step above the first level, which is called educator, and the next level is called key leader, I believe. Next level would be assistant manager, and then finally manager. She also played a unique role in that she was more of an expert on computers than some of the other sales ladies. It was all women working at this store, and so she was in charge of things like the weekly email, or in many cases she was in charge, sending out the weekly email, which included photographs of various Lululemon employees posing in the clothing, and this email goes out to people who are signed up for the Lululemon email. That fact that she was a designer of these weekly ads plays a role in the subsequent story. And romantically, she was attached to a man in Seattle, Washington, who was getting his PhD out there while she was getting her master's in Washington. And according to what he later said at the trial, for instance, they were about to be engaged and be married. That was one reason that Jana had hopes of being able to connect with the Lululemon management team in Vancouver, which is only a couple of hours from Seattle. In fact, she was expecting this man to come into Washington for a long weekend 1 week after the day she was murdered, and she was preparing in part for that long weekend on the day she was killed.
Right. Now, so how long has she been at the location again? Sorry, at the Lululemon?
I'm searching my memory now. A little over a year, I believe, maybe 2 years.
Okay. Now, why don't we introduce another very important character in this story? Obviously, is Brittany Norwood. Tell us how long she had been at the store and what kind of person Brittany Norwood. Give us the background on Brittany Norwood.
She had been at this store in Bethesda about 5 weeks, I think. I mean, that's been a little bit hard to pin down, but in the neighborhood of a month. And she was regarded by many people as a good salesperson, a happy person. She was basically interested in having a good time, liked to get her nails done, her hair done, liked to go out. Of course, most of the young women working in the store, and they were almost all under 30, liked to do all those same things. They were almost all single. They were a very educated bunch, by the way. Almost all had college degrees. 2 of them, I think, had master's and law degrees. But Brittany was known for having a taste for the good life. According to one of her friends, she would always order the more expensive drinks, the more expensive desserts, liked to go to slightly fancier restaurants than some of the other young ladies. And they sometimes wondered how she could afford that. But at the time, nobody really held anything against her at first.
What was Brittany's life like? What was her childhood, and as much as you could ascertain and find out, what was the life
it was similar
of
to Jana's in some ways. She had a middle class upbringing outside Seattle in a town called Federal Way. Her father had his own business. It was a very large family, 4 brothers. She had 4 brothers and 4 sisters, 9 children. They were church-going, went to the local high school. Brittany did all the normal things, apparently did okay in school. She was an outstanding athlete. She was a star soccer player who was very active in a variety of leagues and eventually was recruited as a scholarship athlete to college to go to Stony Brook University on Long Island. They're a family of achievers, couple of her brothers became engineers. One of her sisters became a doctor, tending towards professional life. So in short, she was kind of a girl next door, living in suburbia.
Now, were Brittany and Jana friends in particular, or were they friends in a particular group? Describe that friendship or relationship.
Neither nor, I would say. I mean, there were, I think, a grand total of about 25 people working in the store. And so, of course, you have, in a group like that, various friendships are struck up. Jana and Brittany never got close. Jana had 2 or 3 other very close friends, the top manager, Rachel, a woman named Michael, another woman named Courtney. And Jana had a way of relating to people that made each one of them feel like Jana was her best friend. Lots of people called Jana their best friend and considered themselves to be best friends with her. It was all completely believable from my interviews. Brittany had a couple of friends in the store, one of whom was named Isla, and who told me a lot about what they had done on the day of the murder. They had gone out to have a workout together. Isla was late, so Brittany took the workout in a new gym about a mile away by herself. Then they got together for lunch in Bethesda at a British pub, and then after that they had an impromptu session at the pedicure manicure at one of the spas across the street, and then Brittany had to go to her shift at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So one other woman who had formerly worked at Lululemon and had become a personal trainer in a luxury gym around the corner was also friends with Brittany, and in fact the 2 of them were looking for an apartment together about 3 blocks away from the Lululemon store. Now, what was
Jana's day like? Because you've just mentioned what Brittany was up to that day. So tell us what Jana Murray's day consisted of on that fateful day.
As I said, she was getting ready for a long weekend with her boyfriend who was coming in from Seattle on the following weekend. So on this Friday, she was preoccupied with tying up loose strings and getting stuff done. And one of the chores she was dealing with was getting her taxes done. As you know, in the U.S., it becomes a big deal by the middle of April. And she wanted to get it out of the way, and she was having some problems with the software and wasn't working right. And so she brought her laptop, her Apple laptop, into the store and sat in the back room, the office, to work on her taxes, and was listening to a couple of songs on her iPod, and was there about 2 hours before her shift began, and had a conversation with a good friend in Michigan who was helping her with the taxes. And she also had some repartee with some of the other young women who were on the earlier shift before they left, but I think we'll get to that a little bit later as the situation unfolds.
Yeah. Now, Lululemon has a policy to prevent theft other than probably having surveillance cameras like most stores do, but what is the particular policy of Lululemon each night?
Well, Dan, one very important point here is that Lululemon had no surveillance cameras. I think if you go into any Lululemon store in the world now, you will find surveillance cameras because of this murder. But they did not have any before this murder in Bethesda. They may have them in other stores, but not in Bethesda. And as we will soon discuss, they had them at the Apple store next door. But the policy, which is apparently very standard in the retail business but is pretty strict at Lululemon, is that whenever an employee leaves the store on a break of any kind or at the end of a shift, her bag is checked by somebody else. And this goes both ways. The managers check the workers, and the workers check the managers. And since it's mostly women in the stores we're talking about, everybody has a bag, sometimes 2 bags, because they might have a purse and a gym bag. These were folks who worked out a lot. So that was the policy. And another thing that could be pointed out is that because of what they sold in the store, the people who worked there often made purchases because the stuff was so good and because they got discounts and because they were all sort of fitness freaks, and this was just the right thing to wear when going to a gym or to a yoga studio.
Right. So set the stage of events that happen on this collision, this fateful collision here, Brittany and Jana, and this idea that maybe Brittany was being searched by a fellow employee. To set this up, if I'm jumping ahead a little bit, give me the background information just previous to this altercation.
Yeah, I think we need to step back a little bit and point out two things. One is that before she came to work at Lululemon in Bethesda, Brittany had been working at Lululemon in another store in Georgetown, a shopping district of Washington.
Right.
Lululemon has 5 stores in the area, and that's where one of them is. She had been at that store for a few months in the fall of 2010, and eventually was being suspected of maybe taking money from the till, because the till wasn't always adding up right, and it was always on a shift when Brittany had worked, but nobody had any hard evidence of that. But when the holiday season came and they had special shopping night for the employees, during which they get to load up on inventory that they want to buy to give as gifts to their families and so forth for the holidays, they have an expanded discount program, but it has a cap and a limit for each employee, and apparently Brittany exceeded this limit dramatically, and that was then decided to be grounds for firing her. She was fired from the job. She felt it was unfair. She felt other people had gotten away with exceeding the discount in the past. She raised a big ruckus, and she was hired back, but she was transferred to the Bethesda store. Only 2 or 3 of the top managers at the Bethesda store were aware of the background, that she had been suspected of stealing and had been fired from Georgetown. Most of the other employees at Bethesda did not know that. In the beginning, things went quite well. As I said, she was known to be a happy person and a lot of fun and in many ways a good salesperson. And she posed for those one of those emails that I talked about where the women would wear the Lululemon clothing and pictures would go out in a weekly email. But a few incidents started happening around the store. People started missing money and personal possessions. In one case, $200. In another case, $10. And in another case, a bottle of expensive Vera Wang perfume. All the clues in terms of timing and what people had seen and things that were said pointed to Brittany. Eventually it got so bad that they had a meeting, a top management meeting within the store, that is. It's about 5 or 6 people in that management team. And they spent most of that meeting discussing how to catch Brittany. They had been given to believe by management of Lululemon that they had to get concrete evidence before they could do anything about this. And so they even discussed the possibility of installing a secret surveillance camera, a so-called nanny cam, in a stuffed animal in the back room. This was suggested in passing almost as a joke during the course of this meeting, and after all, this is a meeting of people who sell stretchy pants, as they like to say, yoga clothing, not catch criminals. That's not their job, but somebody got this idea from watching the television show To Catch a Predator. By then, all this management team was convinced that Brittany was a thief and was taking their stuff. In my book, you can read certain details that will help you understand why they were convinced. And they began referring to Brittany after this meeting on a Wednesday afternoon as the thief, and joking around the store, how are we going to catch the thief? Have you caught the thief yet? And this went on for a couple of days leading up to the fateful collision, as you put it, Dan.
Now, despite Jana being this really positive, super upbeat person, she must have been influenced by this talk because she was a manager. In fact, she had the keys to lock up that day, and so would that have affected her? We can get inside her head, but
I think that's a good observation. Let me just say she wasn't really a manager, but she was kind of half a step above Brittany on the hierarchy. She was, not at the lowest level. Brittany was still at the lowest level, educator as they call it. And Jana was the one with the keys to lock up that night. Jana was hyper aware. Everybody was aware of this odd situation. An odd situation had developed on this night. The first oddity was that Jana never worked on Friday nights. And she had a lot of influence on the scheduling anyway, but that was just her pattern. But she worked on this Friday night as a favor to a friend who needed to swap shifts so she could take the weekend off and go with her boyfriend to the beach. It was an early spring weekend. Another oddity was that there were always 3 women on the shift at night, usually all day long as well, at least 3. But they made sure there were 3 on the evening shift for 2 reasons. One, just for business reasons, to sell more clothes, but also because with an all-female staff, there was more security in numbers working on night shifts. On this particular night, the 3rd person couldn't make it in. Apparently she was involved in an automobile accident or something like that. So you had this very unusual situation of Jana and Brittany being together on this Friday night shift.
Now, ordinarily, with 3 people there, would it facilitate one of the persons being a witness during the mandatory search as you went out, or?
That's possible, although I don't think people paid much attention to it. I don't think anybody felt a need for a witness normally because it happened to everybody every time. It was just routine life in the store. The general speculation and consensus is that it could not have come to the extreme violence that it came to, or any attack whatsoever, if there had been 3 people instead of 2. And of course, the truth is the attack takes place after the store is closed, so you might have been down to just 2 people in that case anyway. We can explain that if you want to.
Well, go ahead. Explain that.
Okay, so Jana and Brittany are working together. It was an uneventful shift. One of Jana's good friends on the staff, a woman named Courtney, had made plans with Jana to go out for a drink after they were closed up and shut the store down about 9:45 p.m. But she sent a text message about 8:30 saying she wasn't going to be able to make it. She was tired. She had to go home and go to bed. And she said, in reference to this odd situation of Jana working with, quote, the thief, she said, "I hope you survived." Those were her very last words of communication in a text message to Jana Murray. They closed up the store. Well, before closing up the store, they had the bag check. This is what we know from what Jana Murray said in subsequent phone calls before she was killed. And in the bag check, Jana Murray found in Brittany Norwood's bag a pair of yoga pants with the tags still on them, but no receipts. It was very common for the Lululemon women to buy clothes from the store, but they always had receipts. No receipts in Brittany's bag. She said, "Well, did you buy these?" And Brittany said, "I bought them from Choma." Choma was another employee who had worked on the day shift. The computers were already closed down. They couldn't check it. Jana said, "All right, we'll take care of this later, but I'll have to tell Rachel." Rachel was the senior manager.
Yeah.
At that point, they lock the store. Brittany goes to the subway. Jana goes towards her car in a parking garage. While walking to the garage, she calls Choma. She said, "Did you sell Brittany some pants today?" Choma says, "No. We got her." Choma grasped the significance of this situation immediately. She realized that meant they had caught Brittany in the act of stealing, which is what they basically had hoped to do. Although nobody expected to catch her stealing clothes from the store. They were concerned that she was stealing money and personal possessions from other women out of their bags. Jana then calls the senior manager, Rachel, and says, guess what? We caught the bitch. And Rachel confirmed, that this information meant that this was the deal, that she'd been caught, and Rachel said she would be firing her the next day. Jana got in her car and began to go home to Virginia, across the river in Washington, and got a phone call from Brittany saying she had forgotten her wallet, said Brittany. She needed her Metro card. She couldn't go home in the subway because she didn't have her Metro card. Could they please go back into the store and get her wallet? Jana said, okay. At about 10:05 p.m., Jana hit the buttons on the code on the store to get back in. And then
there was no. Was she
not? No. Go ahead, Dan.
No, was she not suspicious at all? Was there any hesitation at all about? Did she wonder? Did she ask how did your wallet get dislodged from your belongings?
Not that we know of. In fact, according to Brittany's own testimony. Testimony is the wrong word. According to her comments to the police, Jana in that phone call said she had also forgotten her laptop or left her laptop in the store, so that was one reason she was agreeing to go back. And if Jana had any doubts about Brittany at that point or about their trouble to come, we will never know.
Yeah, right. Okay, so why don't you continue?
So they go back into the store. The next thing we know for a fact takes us to the Apple store right next to Lululemon. Lululemon and Apple shared a wall. And people in the Apple store were also closing up. They had a big day and had a lot to do because they'd introduced the iPad 2 that afternoon. And one of the managers started hearing strange noises coming through the wall that they shared with Lululemon. They were so strange. There were thuds and yelps and squeals and funny breathing. And so she went and got another manager, a senior manager from upstairs in the Apple store, brought her back down and brought him back down. And they both listened to the wall. And you can see all of this on the internal indoor video surveillance camera of the Apple store. And he later said that he heard some kind of drama on the other side of the wall. But eventually they started hearing actual words coming through the wall, and they were very strong language. On one side you heard, on the right-hand side, one female voice was saying, "Talk to me, tell me what's going on. Why won't you tell me?" To the left, another female voice, more hysterical, was saying, "Stop. Oh, God, please help me, God." And then after that, things began to slow down, and after a few minutes, they got silent. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yes, absolutely. I'm with you. Your phone's fine.
I'm worried that, are you hearing a little beep? I apologize. I think my phone may be acting up, and I might have to switch to another phone. But let's continue for the moment.
Sure, certainly.
Sorry about that.
So now Rachel, this is the next day, or do we go that far? Nothing else?
No, this is, well, I mean, it depends on how much you want me to go ahead and tell at this point.
Let's not reveal. We've got that much information. Let's go to what happens the next day, and the witness at the Apple store next door waiting for his iPad 2. So tell us what happens the next day.
Okay. The next morning, about 8 o'clock, Rachel arrived at the store to open it up early because she needed to do some work before the 10 o'clock opening. She opens the door, goes in, finds bloody footprints all over the floor, finds tables turned over, clothing on the floor, a television that was normally on the wall, or a flat-screen TV, had fallen down and broken, and a general sense of mayhem in the store. As she was standing there taking all this in, she heard a moaning coming from the back of the store. She turned around and ran out of the store.
Yeah.
And that's when a young man sitting on a bench who was already there to get in line to buy his Apple iPad 2 later in the morning saw her and said, "What's wrong? Can I help? Do you want me to go in with you?" And she said, "Yes." He went in and went much farther into the store, so far that he even pushed open a door leading to a back hallway, and the door wouldn't open very far, and he peeked in to see why, and he saw why. There was a body lying on the floor blocking the door. He reached in and sort of poked the body with his fingers to see if there was any reaction, any life, and there was none. He turned around to head back out of the store and saw on his right a bathroom door that was open and another body lying on the floor surrounded by blood and cuts. This person was all cut in many places. Her arms were above her head, pulled up behind her head and tied together. Her wrists and her ankles were bound. But he saw that her chest was moving. She was breathing. So she was alive. But one thing that shocked him a lot was he noticed her clothing had been ripped and cut, and he noticed that the pants had been cut open at the crotch. He hurries out of the store and tells Rachel what he has seen. She's already called 911 the first time, and then she calls again. And one of the things that you hear on the 911 tape, and which is in my book, is that she says to the police, "Oh, my God, I think one of my girls may be hurt." Of course, in the end, it was much worse than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they both believe that it's a man's body, or at least definitely Ryan Hod believes it's a man's body.
That's right.
So now the police arrive, and
Dan, you're breaking up a tiny bit. Let me see if I can switch to my other phone here real quick without losing you, okay?
Okay.
I think the phone I'm using is losing power. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Are you there? Dan? Let's see. Dan?
Here we go.
Yeah, I apologize for this.
No problem. That was okay.
Okay.
Okay, now, so tell us, continue with that.
The police arrive very quickly, within 2 minutes, and the policewoman who gets out of her cruiser tells both of them to stay outside, pulls her pistol, and proceeds to go into the store and clear the store, as they say in the business, with a pistol ready to fire if necessary. She later said that she thought that at any second someone could jump out and try to harm her or kill her. As far as everybody was concerned, there might very well still be an intruder inside the store. And nobody knew exactly the condition of these two people yet. Finally, when she was satisfied that there was nobody about to jump out at her, she had looked in all the in the back room, in the restrooms, and had walked past the dressing rooms. She pushed open this door to the back room and was able to squeeze in and was able to reach down and touch the neck of the body that she saw on the floor to see if there was a pulse. There was no pulse. She said she was cold, she was stiff. Those are the policewoman's words. At that point, she knew she was dealing with a dead person, and she knew at that point it was a woman. Shockingly, this woman was lying on her face, but her pants had also been slit at the crotch from behind. So everything pointed towards sexual assault and murder.
Mm-hmm. So now, what's the state of Brittany, and what happens as a result? She's taken to the hospital, obviously, as well, and of course, as procedure, police will question her for any information that they have. They sort of don't really have much of an idea what's going on, but it may look a certain way right at this time. Tell us about that interview with police.
Well, she said to the police that she and Jana had been attacked by two masked men in black who had jumped them shortly after they came back into the store. And it began with a blow to the back of the head of Jana. Brittany claimed that they grabbed her by her hair, and her assailant was behind her most of the time. She claimed that he threatened to slit her throat. He called her nasty, misogynistic, and racist names. He slammed her down to the floor. She says he raped her sexually, as well as with a wooden clothes hanger. As far as Jana was concerned, she claimed she kept hearing screams and thuds, and finally Jana went quiet. But she seemed not to know during this first interview with the police that Jana was actually dead. She asked the policewoman, "How is my friend doing?" Everything that Brittany said in this 45-minute first interview was taped, and I've listened to it. And the police, of course, did too. And when the detective went back to the store and related the story Brittany had told her, everything they saw in the store checked out with what Brittany had said about where things had happened, where her jacket and her bag had fallen. They saw these bloody footprints all around the store suggesting a monumental fight. And, of course, Jana lay in the back room where Brittany would have only been able to hear her final screams. And so the story seemed utterly plausible at the beginning.
The footprints that you're talking about, the bloody footprints, boot prints, what's the particular thing about them that would throw off police in particular? You're talking about two women, and there may be a look for a mysterious assailant, like she says, these two men. What kind of footprints are we looking at?
Well, it's for, right at first, all you knew was a lot of bloody footprints, some small, some big. It took a couple of days for the forensic experts to sort this out. But one thing that was clear was that there were some footprints that were made from very large men's sneakers, and some footprints made from women's sneakers. That's what they knew then. Shall I go on and explain the forensic results?
Yes,
that gets ahead of the story, doesn't it?
Well, the other thing I wanted to ask, too, is that did police have any suspicions whatsoever about the way she was tied, zip ties? Was there any suspicion at that time?
There were a couple of things about the story that seemed odd to some of the veteran cops, including her hands being above her head. Why couldn't she just have pulled her hands down? In her explanation of the story, she had been lying there for hours and hours. Why couldn't she have gone to her cell phone and called the cops, for example, called 911? But those seeming inconsistencies were overweighed dramatically by all the other evidence that was around that made it appear that the story she was telling was correct. But then there was a very crucial breakthrough, Dan. When the police started inquiring around the neighborhood and other stores and shops for more evidence and witnesses, they found in the Apple store not only the story I already told about hearing the noises in the wall against the wall inside the store, but a video surveillance camera outside the Apple store in the rear near the parking lot showed two men in black walking through the camera screen at about 1 hour past the time the murder was supposed to have occurred, or 1 hour past the time the women re-entered the store. They knew the time because it was recorded on the burglar alarm system. These were the camera showed these two men coming from the direction where the Lululemon store was. Turned out much later, it turns out they were coming from a restaurant that was also in that direction. But at this point, the police have these two men on video that seem to fit the description that Brittany has given, and there was just every reason to believe that what she had told them is what had happened, despite maybe some nagging doubts about why her hands were over her head.
She had a laceration that was described as fairly serious on her forehead.
I'm sorry, Dan. I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear you. Shall I try calling you back on my other phone?
Yeah. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We've had problems with this landline phone, and Peter has accommodated us by trying to call back in, and we'll see if it works out again. Sorry for the inconvenience. Here we go. Well, it looks like it's engaging. I apologize for this. Peter Ross Range, trying to call back and salvage the last 15 minutes of this interview with him. Talking about the murder in the yoga store. Peter Ross Range. I really apologize. It looks like he is calling right now, and I'm doing everything in my power to reconnect us. I apologize. I don't know what to say with that 15. For those listening to this, is really short book. This is under 200 pages. The use of the yoga store. This came out in 2018. And I apologize once again, my loyal audience, those who tune in all over the world. Maybe I'll just use this next couple minutes to tell them, I'm sure, about radio and we'll sort this out. I'm sure hoping some interesting in the future. Charles Starkweather case, historic American murder trial, and fascinating case. I also wanted to say that the program has now two crime series that John Safran had created and aired on the Australian Broadcast Corporation Radio National. It's their national radio corporation, and it's a 6-part series. Anne Rule, Harold Schechter, James Jensen, the graphic artist, talking about the Green River Killer, or his graphic novel about the Green River Killer. A very interesting author of Fatal Vision, Joe McGinnis, and myself. Both of us, our program was titled Dancing with the Devil. And Anne Rule, like I said, Harold Schechter, and Victoria Redstall. So if you have time, please check out my Facebook page, Dan Zupansky, and or the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. You can type in John Safran. Very interesting series, even if you don't listen to my interview, but it'd be nice if you listen to my interview talking about Trophy Kill and how I betrayed a serial killer as he depicted the story. Well, we'll see if we can get Peter back on the air here. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Dan.
Sorry about that. We had about 5 minutes of the audience having to listen to me. Thank God you're back. Okay, so let's get back to the story now. We were talking about, when we last left off, the state of Brittany and the lacerations on her face, and some of the things that of course we know that they looked at the video next door at the Apple store, and there was 2 men that fit the description, so they're at least following that lead. Tell us about some of the injuries that Brittany had when police discovered her?
She had a nasty gash over her forehead, which had bled quite a bit down the front of her face. She had a sort of a cross-hatching of superficial or thin little knife cuts on her cheeks. She had cuts on her chest, on her breasts, and on her legs. And she even had cuts on her back. It was not quite clear how those cuts would have gotten there. There was a lot of broken glass in the bathroom. But she was a mess. However, I've read the physician's report from the emergency room, and he classified almost all of her wounds as superficial. She only needed a few stitches, and within days she was healing nicely.
Right. Now, so how do police follow up with this story initially? Tell us how they do proceed.
Well, they put out the alarm throughout the community, and the whole community was terrorized because they really believed there were two masked men in black running around, possibly ready to commit more murder and sexual assault. The police began trying to find witnesses and evidence in the nearby area, and at first they came up dry, but finally in one store they got a story from a manager who talked about a guy they had seen around the neighborhood a lot who had done some things out of the ordinary on the day of and the day after the murder, and they went to the restaurant where he usually hung out and got some more evidence, and they thought they had a hot suspect. 2 or 3 things about this this evidence suggested he could be involved. But within a day and a half, they had tracked him down. And one of the most incriminating things was that he was in a hospital with bloody wounds, being treated in an emergency room, and when they, which could have flowed from some sort of a violent episode the night before in the Lululemon store. When they found him in this hospital, and he was 8 miles away, he could have gone to a much closer hospital than that. When they found him, however, he had a pretty good story. He made all sorts of wild claims about other people maybe being in that store and about getting into a fight. And it all seemed a little preposterous, but they couldn't connect him to the Lululemon store. And the lead detective in this case, a veteran named Jim Drury, said to the state's attorney, "I'm not feeling this guy." And this detective was famous for his ability to feel out suspects. And they eventually were able to establish that this guy had nothing to do whatsoever with the murder. So on the third night, fourth night if you count the murder night, those 2 detectives, the lead detectives, finally went to see Brittany Norwood for the first time, and that's when the case began to turn a little bit.
Let me ask this question. She had claimed to be brutally raped with an object and sexually. Now tell us about the investigation in terms of the police following that very, very important evidence. Right.
The special nurse who does the rape test investigation whenever a person arrives in an emergency room and claims she's been raped came to the hospital and gave Brittany the normal test, and her report showed no evidence of rape, either chemically in terms of sperm or in terms of any damage to tissue. She later testified that does not prove, that's not completely dispositive, that does not prove that a rape has not occurred. Rape can occur without either of those things being in evidence, but it was somewhat strange, especially given the fact that Brittany claimed to have been raped by a wooden coat hanger that had serrated edges. It was the kind of hanger they used for hanging up some of the clothes in the store. And the coat hanger, by the way, and similar coat hangers were found on the floor in the store right where they would have been had she been raped by one of them. That was another one of the reasons the police believed her story in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. But it did take a few days for that analysis to come back anyway. And so in the interim, with the panic that was in the community and the pressure to find suspects, they went with this. Now, tell us about the interview with Brittany and what they learned from that interview and how they plan to interview her.
Right. I want to just say, Dan, that I don't think that the police were overreacting to the public pressure to find suspects.
No.
I mean, they wanted to find the bad guys and not just satisfy the community outcry. That's my judgment after working on this for almost a year. They were doing what we would want them to do in a situation like this. And only in the evening that I'm about to describe did doubts begin to creep in. They went to see Brittany at her home. She told them some astonishing things that they had not heard before, like the fact that the bad guys had pushed her down on top of Jana's body, like the fact that a pair of men's sneakers that had been found in the store on a rack in the store actually belonged to the store. Those sneakers had not been left behind by some intruders. The store kept a pair of men's sneakers there for fitting purposes for some of the small amount of men's clothing that they sold. I think they also had women's sneakers available as well. Just as you would have try-on socks in a shoe store. They had these shoes that a man could put on if he wanted to have a pair of workout pants altered. That astonished one of the detectives in particular because it suggested that bad guys had not come in from the outside, because these shoes matched the footprints, the bloody footprints, the large bloody footprints matched these shoes perfectly. And furthermore, the shoe print expert, the blood and footprint analysts, they call them track and trail guys, had been astonished to figure out that there were only two sets of footprints in all of these bloody tracks around the store, one small women's and one large men's. Now, there were supposed to be two women being attacked and two men doing the attacking. There should have been four sets of footprints, but there were only two. And furthermore, he figured out that the men's footprints always overlay the women's footprints. They didn't alternate as you would expect in a scuffle or in a fight situation, which to the track and trail expert suggested that all the men's footprints, bloody footprints, had been created after all the women's bloody footprints, not simultaneously.
And once with the police having that information, how did they proceed with their questioning? She seemed to be expanding on her story, which is always sort of an indication of lying as well. But tell us how they proceed with asking her more questions.
Well, first the two detectives went back to the police station, and on the way back, the young detective said to the older detective, or indicated that he was having second thoughts about the whole story, and he finally came out with it and said, "I think Brittany killed Jana." And the older detective said, "I did not want to believe it. It seemed it was the unthinkable." It was unthinkable to all of us as we learned about this around here later, a few days later. But this was the most drastic leap you could possibly make from believing the logical thing in a situation like this is that that men attacked women and that they would be the way they were described. That a woman had attacked another woman, two educated middle-class people, just was totally unthinkable. And when they got back to the police station, the young detective didn't want to say anything at first, and the older detective encouraged him to do so. And the whole detective squad erupted in outcry, saying, "That can't be possible. You're out of your mind," blah, blah, blah. But the head of the squad, Detective Wittenberger, said, "Well, let's try to look at it from this point of view and see what we can figure out." So they started studying the photographs they had of Brittany and of her wounds, and they started noticing several things. And Wittenberger was experienced with this because he had dealt with self-inflicted wounds in the past. The younger detective had not. He said, see how those cuts are parallel? They go in straight lines. And you see how superficial they are? And he said, I've seen that before. That is a pattern of self-inflicted wounds. But they were stymied by one thing, and that was the wounds on her back. They were also, however, straight lines, and they were also parallel. And the question was, how do you do that? Well, both detectives standing in front of this picture on their computer monitor reached behind their backs and drew their hands across their backs as if they had a knife or a sharp object. And sure enough, you could make a cut very easily like that. And furthermore, they noticed that when you draw your hand across your back, it trends upward from one side to the other. It's kind of the way your elbow leads your hand. And that's exactly what the cuts on Brittany's back were doing. They were trending upward. So people began to think there might be some truth to this, and the question was how to pursue it next.
The other question I have, too, is if Brittany claims that Jana was also raped, they must have done a rape kit. They could easily have enough evidence there for a rape kit on her. What were the results there?
Dan, I'm having a hard time hearing you as well. I do not know. Did not see any reports that a rape test was performed in her case. Well, maybe I should back off. You're the first person to actually ask me this, and now I'm remembering, the autopsy report is about 26 pages long, single-spaced, and now that I think about it, I do believe there is a point in the report where it says that, in a very routine sort of way, no sperm detected. So that is, and I suspect that is a routine notation that would be done in all autopsies of a woman.
Yeah, okay. So, what is the process that police do finally get around to putting it together that she is the suspect, and how do they then, again, have another conversation here that leads up to her?
Dan, I apologize. You're breaking up again on me. I am so sorry. I'm afraid it's mine.
Time your phone is breaking up too. So, we're over the time that we're now in an archive anyway. But so people who were listening live, which is not that many people. Most people will listen to this in the archive. If we have to, we could end the interview now and just let people know that there's much more to the story. Obviously, we don't want to give anything away. The trial is, like you say, it's a very, very interesting trial, so it's not a foregone conclusion, that's true.
Right. I think I understood what you said, and the answer is right.
Yeah, you're breaking up too, and really, so anyway, I want to thank you, Peter, for a very, very informative interview, and thank you very much for coming on and talking about murder in the Yoga Store. It's a very fascinating story, and I urge people that are interested in the story so far that there's much more to the story, and to look this up on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And of course, is there another way that you would recommend? Is there any benefits, sort of autographed copies or anything available if you went to a website? Do you have a website or a Facebook page? How do you recommend people getting in touch with you? And
I do have a Facebook page, which I don't use very often. I mean, it is available through Amazon, and if folks want an autographed copy, yes, they can. I don't quite understand how that works with Facebook. Actually, my address is on the inside of the paperback version under the name of the press. And a person could write to me at that address on the copyright page of the book.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you very much, Peter, and I apologize that we didn't have a little bit more time. We're going to have a little bit more time to look through other things, but at another time. And I want to wish you the best with this, and thank you for coming on and talking about murder in the Yoga Store.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure.